On this episode, we're joined by the hosts of the Talk Travel Asia podcast for a fun discussion on living in Asia.
So if you want to kick back and listen to a few fun stories from four guys with a combined 80 years as expats, you'll dig this episode of the Bangkok podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 to be a digital nomad, but failed terribly and ended up in an office job because it turned out that being a digital nomad wasn't a thing in 2001.
I'm not even sure it's a thing now. What?
Zing.
All the digital nomads I know, they teach classes in how to be a digital nomad.
Being a digital nomad is like being an actor. Like every once in a while, someone will be fabulously successful at it, and the others are just skimping by.
Right. All right. And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 21 years ago. Fell in love with having friends who are experts on Southeast Asian travel, so I don't have to become one.
Nice. It's a good one, right?
And that's not even ironic. Like you and I, we know so many experts on traveling in Asia. It's like I don't need to know anything. I can just ask them.
Right. It's like having a whole bunch of friends who are doctors or something. Like you can just.
That is exactly right. And of course, our topic tonight, our show tonight, is with our friends who are travel experts.
Yeah.
But yeah, that just jogged my mind, and I'm just thinking that it's just. I can just send an email. There's so many. There's probably 5 or 6 people who are either my friends or friends of the podcast, who they're honestly, I consider them, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think they're like the world experts in Southeast Asian travel. Like Joe Cummings, you can't say he's not a world expert.
Right.
Dan Fraser, Scott and Trevor from Tonight's Show. These are the experts.
Right. Exactly. And you can say like, oh, I want to go to this province. They're like, ooh, you got to check out this restaurant in this one village, but come in through the back road because there's a really nice temple there. That's right. That's a good
exactly
resource to be able to tap into.
No, that's exactly you got that right. That's it. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. First, an extra big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our ad-free regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos and videos of our interviews, discounts on swag, access to our Discord server, and various other things that aren't available to regular listeners. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and random topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about Bangkok's hard target of opening up on October 1st, which is apparently still going to happen despite the COVID outbreak, the uncertainty that comes with having a kid who is too young to be vaccinated, and how completely clueless Greg and I are about Lisa of Blackpink and the whole genre of K-pop. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
There's always time to learn, but there is a cutoff line. Like I can't be, as a 46-year-old male, I can't be walking down the street boning up, like listening to K-pop. Like, yeah, I just want to learn about the new trend. That would be just weird.
Yeah, that would be kind of weird, but whatever. You're young at heart, so maybe you can pull it off.
At heart. All right. Well, before we jump into it, I have to mention this story, Ed, we got from one of our listeners. Now, you remember from last week's bonus show, I talked about how I stubbed my toe. I had the mother of all toe stubs.
I remember this, of course.
Yeah, luckily it wasn't broken, but my toenail looks like it's going to come off eventually, and it's kind of bruised and gross. So we just mentioned that quickly on the podcast, and then we got this email from Joe, which made me guffaw with his story, and I'm just going to read it really quickly here. He says, you mentioned the idea of the biggest toe stub ever, and that we all probably have one. When I was about 12, my bedroom was in the attic of our house. It was mostly unfinished and had a set of wooden steps that went up 3 steps, and then there was a landing, and then there were 12 or 13 steps to the top of the attic. One time I was sick, and I needed to head down the stairs and go to the bathroom and throw up. Unfortunately, I made it about 2 steps down the stairs, vomited on the wooden steps, and then slid down the rest of the way and rammed my toe directly into the wall at the landing.
That is worth a guffaw, no doubt.
He said, even though it happened over 50 years ago, I remember the sound of me sliding down the stairs while puking and banging my toe, the hardest it has ever been banged. And I blame you for making me remember that terrible time.
Wow, who would have guessed that the biggest toe stub ever would have been the spark to lead to such a memory?
Maybe it's just me, man, but like gross, horrible things like that. I just laugh so hard at this.
Maybe we should do a whole show of our listeners' biggest toe stubs. So just all of our listeners. So if you have good toe stub stories, please send them in. If we get enough, maybe we'll do a whole show of our listeners' greatest toe stubs.
Riveting listening. The annual toe stub-ish episode.
It's great.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks, Joe, for sending that in. I hope your toe is better now. All right. Well, this episode was fun to record. As you know, the two best podcasts in Thailand are this one, of course, as well as the excellent Talk Travel Asia podcast hosted by Scott Coates and Trevor Ranges. Now, as it turns out, me, Ed, Scott, and Trevor have all been in Asia for roughly the same length of time and have all known each other since we were bemused and befuddled expats running around Bangkok trying to make sense of the place. Now, thankfully, we've all remained close over the years, so we thought it would be fun to get together, online of course, and chat about some of the amusing, weird, and interesting stories that always make us laugh. So here are the four of us getting together to talk about the last 20 or so years in Asia.
Hey Scott, how you doing? Hey Greg, Ed.
I'm doing good, Trevor, and happy that we have linked up with Ed and Greg from the Bangkok podcast. How are you guys?
Awesome.
Great. Happy to be here.
So I'm in Hua Hin, Trevor's in Phnom Penh, and Ed and Greg, you guys are in Bangkok. Is that right?
That is correct.
I didn't know you were Hua Hin. Yeah, I'm in Bangkok still.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we got talking and we thought, hey, we all like each other. Why don't we hook up for an episode and kind of run it on both of our shows? And why don't we just talk a bit about kind of our lives here? How did we get started here? How have we evolved in Thailand? How has Thailand impacted and helped us evolve? So we're just going to chat it up and have that quick conversation. And maybe first, without going into great detail, because I think most people know, but just in case, like, Ed, what first brought you here?
Actually, I was a lawyer in Chicago, got tired of it pretty quickly, and I was just looking for anything to do that was interesting. And a friend of a friend told me about this teaching job in Thailand. I was like, Thailand? What? You know, that's on the other side of the world. And I took the job. And it's kind of ironic now since I've been in Thailand for 20 years. It was a 1-year contract, and I was so skeptical that I would want to stay for 1 year that I asked them to renegotiate, and they changed it to 6 months.
Ah, lucky for you.
Yeah, and that's how I got here. And one thing led to another, and 20 years later, I'm still here.
Blam.
Trevor, how about you?
Well, it's funny you should say, because I came to Thailand to work for the same company that Ed did. And when I moved to Thailand, I told people I was moving to Thailand, even though it was only a 3-month contract that I was offered. And after 3 months, they offered me an additional 3 months, and then that became a year. And then 2 years later, I was like, I guess I did move to Thailand, and I gave up my storage locker that I'd been paying for all those months, and stayed forever.
Accidental kind of. And Greg, how did you end up here?
Yeah, well, I came home one day and my roommate said, this is in Canada, and he said, hey, let's go and see our friend Penny, who just recently moved to Chiang Mai. And I said, I can't just go to Thailand to see Penny. And he said, why not? And I said, I don't know. I guess I probably could. And we planned, we saved, and we came over here, and we were going to spend 4 months traveling around. We hired a great company to show us the ropes when we got to Thailand called Smiling Albino, which one of us has co-founded. And we finished that great tour, and then my buddy left after 12 days. And I said, the hell with you, I'm going to stay and see what happens. And boom, 20 years.
It happened. And I'm the guy that co-founded the travel company that Greg came and had a trip with. I moved here in September 99 with the dream of starting a travel company, and who would have guessed it worked? And the rest, as they say, is history. So, Trevor brought this next one up. Is how and when did all of us meet?
Yeah, well, I think it's cool that Greg and you met like right off the bat, kind of like that, in a way that Ed and I kind of met right off the bat as well, and then we crossed paths with the two of you guys a couple of years later. I first met Scott, I think, when he came to a Halloween party that Ed and I were throwing in the house we lived in together.
I do remember exactly when I met Trevor, because it was just in a buddy's apartment who we were all working in the same company, and they had put us up in the same building. And my buddy Brian was like, "Oh yeah, you got to meet this guy, Trevor. He's like a new teacher." And so I remember when I met Trevor. I don't remember meeting Scott, and I don't remember actually meeting Greg.
That's funny because I don't remember meeting you either, Ed, but I do remember the first time I met Trevor. And I think I was sitting in maybe a Dunkin' Donuts in Sam Square and with Ed, I think, with someone. And this random dude walked in and it was Trevor. And he's like, "Hey, how's it going?" And then you had just come from the movie poster store. Oh, yeah. And you unrolled an original Thai language poster of Star Wars from 1977 that you'd picked up. Oh, that's a good one. And I was like, "Who's this new guy? Poster. He's nerdy and I love it."
Cool. So I think we're just going to work through a series of questions that we've kind of thought might be interesting and kind of go in semi-random order. So why don't I kick off this question, then each other question, one of you guys grab it. But thinking, what were some of your early experiences with food and how did you evolve with that food, Ed?
Interesting. When I got here, it's weird. I've gone through weird diet changes. When I got here, I was vegetarian. I did that for a few years, and then I went back to eating meat like a monster. And then about 5 years ago, I went back to being vegetarian. So I remember being vegetarian when I got here, and it was interesting because Bangkok is vegetarian friendly in a way, but it's not like in the States where there's a lot of like just vegetarian restaurants. So I had to learn how to ask for J food. J is the word in Thai that roughly approximates being vegetarian. But I think I had a lot of the normal issues of worrying about spiciness. I mean, it's the classic thing, but I remember that because I like spicy food, but then if you order it really spicy, I can't eat it, you know? So you have to learn how to order like spicy, but not Thai spicy.
Yeah.
So even though I was a vegetarian, I think I had a more or less fairly typical experience, just adjusting to all the different options. I learned that some Thai food I love. Like I totally fell in love with, I already ate pad Thai in the States because that's the classic thing, even though most people don't eat it here that much. But like tom yum I fell in love with. Tom kha I totally fell in love with. But I learned I don't like fish sauce and I don't like durian, which is these are two classic things. I'm very much a typical foreigner in that respect. I wish I loved it, but I don't.
I'm with you on both those. How about you, Greg?
Yeah, Ed's dislike of durian became clear on the Bangkok podcast episode where we tried the durian pizza at Pizza Company. That was a fun night. You know, it's funny. I'm usually not shy at all, but when I first came to Bangkok, I was really hesitant to learn how things worked. Like I would go to a food court, and you know how you have to give money to get coupons and then buy your food with the coupons. Like I didn't know any Thai, and I was really shy to just point and try to figure out how things worked, and so I just didn't do it. And I was living on Thong Lo Soi 13 and in this crappy old penthouse that someone owned, and they took pity on me with my first job because they didn't have enough money to buy my own place yet. And the only thing I knew how to say was kalpat gai, which is chicken fried rice. And the only place I knew that sold it was like a 25-minute walk away, even though there was probably about 30 other stalls within 5 minutes from my house that sold it, but I was too scared to go out and explore. So every night by myself, I would walk 25 minutes to this one stall down on Sukhumvit somewhere, and I would order my kalpat gai, and then I would take it home and eat alone. And it was just super lame, and I'm so embarrassed that I was so nervous to jump in and do it. But once I started getting used to things and making some friends, then it was just no holds barred, and I've never been shy to eat anything after that.
That's a heck of a walk for kalpat gai, which is so common. But, you know, you said shy, and I can empathize with that. I was pretty shy, and if I looked at it and I didn't really know what it was, I wasn't probably going to try it. That said, I do remember liking kway teow gai. In the first apartment I stayed at, a friend's apartment, I thought it was incredible that you could call down to the restaurant on the ground floor and they would bring food up to you. I just thought it was a mind bender.
Oh, yeah,
that for
sure.
like $1, they would do that. I remember just never getting sick of ordering noodle soup and fried rice. I then, of course, got hooked on pat kapow, basil, and chili. I mean, every foreigner loves that. But strangely, you know, I didn't put vinegar on noodle dishes for at least 5+ years. And then it was Derek Van Pelt, a recent guest on your show, that one time told me, probably said, it's the way forward. And I started putting vinegar on noodles. And I also didn't eat khao man gai, which is like the most basic dish, you know, rice cooked in chicken broth with some steamed chicken on top, for at least 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And I don't have a stomach for shrimp paste anything real fishy, but I've grown to love more of it. How about you, Trevor?
Wow, I feel like I won this round because I was lucky, and Ed probably ate there as well. But I could picture Ed eating cow tom, or what'd you say, the coconut one? Sorry, I can picture Ed's.
Oh, you mean
tom
Tom
kha?
Kha.
Yeah, you always
Tom
order
Kha.
tom kha. I remember that. Yeah, but we were lucky that the building that Ed and I lived in when we first moved to Thailand 20 years ago, there was a man called Soup Man who had this little street stall down at the end of our soy, and it was amazing. Like, aside from the coagulated blood that was in the stewed chicken soup leg, that was you could just eat around that. But that quickly became my comfort food. So his khao man gai and the bap mi mudang, and he made his own mudang, and the chicken soup with that stewed chicken leg, it was also amazing. I ate there constantly. Yeah.
I'm guessing Cambodia is similar, but Greg and I talk on the podcast a lot about, I think Thailand lives up to its reputation for food. It really does. I think it's just one of the best places to eat, I think, on the planet. I mean, even for international food. I mean, maybe not for something I don't know, I eat a lot of Lebanese food. I eat some Italian food, but I eat a lot of Thai food. And when it comes to eating, I feel pretty lucky to be in Bangkok.
That was a Soi 1 thing, though, as well, because just when we lived on Sukhumvit Soi 1, there was all that Arab food nearby, and you really got a taste for the international offerings that Bangkok had available very quickly and easily.
For sure.
You want to know something crazy is that I never really had a mango in my entire life until I came to Thailand, and then I tried it, and I was like, not for me.
Really?
And I didn't eat mangoes with any regularity at all until about 6 years ago. And then I had mango, and I'm like, what am I doing? This is delicious.
I love mango.
It sounds crazy. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, we're going to talk about learning the language, and Thai is a different language, obviously, because they have a different alphabet than we use in English, and they have tones, which can be tricky. And the sentences are all just a bunch of letters strung together with no spaces in between the words. And sometimes the vowels are above or below or behind the consonants. How did you guys deal with the challenges of language, and how proficient have you become in it over the past 20 years? Greg, why don't you shoot first here?
I am embarrassed at the level of Thai that I speak. I can get through the day. I can have simple conversations about a lot of popular topics. But I always say, if I met a guy in Canada who had been living there for 20 years, as I've been living in Thailand, and he spoke English at the same level I speak Thai, I'd be like, dude, come on. This is pathetic. This is a terrible, terrible show of dedication to your new home. So at this stage, I should be on stage in front of a crowd reading original Thai poetry that I had written, but I'm not. And it's I've no one to blame but myself. It's just alternating between a lack of time, a lack of money, and a lack of ambition and willpower and drive to force myself into positions where I need to practice Thai, which I think is the key. So I've even tried to have Thai nights with my wife, and her English is excellent. It's near fluent. But after about 10 minutes of me struggling to speak Thai, she just goes, you know what? This is not working. Let's just not do this. And I find it's really hard too. If you ask a regular Thai person, why is this word a high tone when this consonant is a middle class consonant? Most Thai people won't know. They'll just say, well, I don't know. That's just the way it is, which is exactly the same way that I describe English. If someone asks me, why is this a past participle of this thing? And I'm like, I have no idea. That's just how it's spoken. So I really think if you have a question about Thai, you really need to ask a Thai teacher for the right answer. But anyway, my Thai is okay, but it can sure as hell be a lot better.
Yeah, so Scott, I mentioned that you picked it up by putting yourself in situations where you had to speak Thai, and you lived in an area that intentionally kind of allowed you to do so.
Yeah, I will preface it, though. I'm in the exact same boat as Greg is. No excuse, 21 years I should be fluent, and I'm not. That said, I lived out in Ramkhamhaeng, the eastern suburbs, and also by virtue of my business, putting together a travel business, we were always trying to meet people and say, rent a motorbike and then drive it here and get it picked up by a truck. So I had to learn a bit more. It probably took me 12 years or so until I decided to learn the alphabet. And that's the first thing I think anyone should do now is learn the alphabet. It's actually not that hard. And then you can just read signs everywhere you're going. And it really helps a lot. But I mean, even after all these years, just when I think I've got like a word down pat, I'll say it and someone has no idea. I remember about a year ago, I ordered a water and I got a coconut. And I still don't know how that happened, but maybe they weren't listening well. But I remember I got that coconut, and I really inside I was crushed. I was like, "Oh my god!" Like, anyhow,
Scott, you know what that reminds me of? Once I got in a taxi to go to Ayutthaya, and I had my camera, and it was just going to be like a photo day. I'm like, it was like a Saturday. I'll go to Ayutthaya. I'll take some pictures. So I get in a taxi, and I'm like, buy Ayutthaya, and then we negotiated the price. No problem. Heads out. About 45 minutes later, I realized we're like south of Bangkok. We're like heading towards like Chonburi. And I'm like, bye nai. And he's like, Pattaya. Bye Pattaya, chamai. And I'm like, no, I want to go to Ayutthaya. Like he just sees a white face. He doesn't understand what I'm saying. My pronunciation was so bad that he just takes me to Pattaya. That's the assumption. The assumption is I'm going to Pattaya.
Right. Well, and this is, I'm not bashing Thai people, but I found this an awful lot, is that people will be so thrown off by speaking to a Westerner in Thai, and they just get something predetermined in their head that you want, to where I found they don't actually really listen to what it is you're saying, and be it a food dish or just what you're saying with Pattaya.
I agree 100%, and this has been a personal breakthrough I had, because it's common sense that when you're learning a foreign language and you're in their country, that it's your fault. Dude, this was a huge realization for me. It's kind of common sense that when you're living in a foreign country and you're learning a foreign language, that any miscommunication is your fault. And I'm not exaggerating. I think that's the way I thought for 15 years. Anytime there's a miscommunication, I'm like, God, my Thai sucks. I really got to work on it. But about 5 years ago, I just woke up to the reality that there are a lot of Thai people who are just not very good listeners for whatever reason, and again, it might just be because they don't know how to react to like a Thai sounds coming out of a white face. I think it doesn't compute for some of them. It's like it doesn't make sense. I actually think it's an important thing for expats to realize that actually it's not always your fault. I really think that's true now. Now I've gotten into arguments with early expats. Not the wise old expat like myself, early expats who think I'm putting down Thai people, or who think like, no, it's our fault. And I'm like, I get it, dude. But you don't understand. Like, there's always two sides to communication. There's two sides. There's the speaker and listener. Think about how many times you have sorted out someone else's bad accent while they speak English. I mean, I feel like I could put up with a pretty bad accent and still figure out what they're saying in English. But I think maybe Thai people just don't have enough experience doing that. If you're a native English speaker, you just, whatever, you have some kind of privilege or you have some advantage that everyone is trying to speak your language. So we have a lifetime of listening to Indian people or Chinese people speaking English in a thick accent. So maybe that's why we're better at it. But this is a message out to all the expats out there struggling with Thai. It's not always your fault. That's the truth. It's just the real truth. This is going to make me sound like a broken record, but I'm on the same level as you. Not same level, but I have had the same experiences as you and Greg. Scott and Greg, and I feel it's the same. The only slight difference in my case is that after 2 years, I made a really serious effort to learn Thai. I made hundreds of note cards by hand, which coincidentally I recently found. I still have them, but I have hundreds of note cards in all these categories. I reached a certain plateau, but I don't think it's gotten better. It's so painful to have this come out of my mouth. I don't think my Thai's gotten better in 17 years. 17, the lifetime of, it's like someone going to college from the time they were born to going to college.
Now say that in Thai.
I don't think my Thai's gotten better. But I was going to say the difference is, I married one of my Thai teachers, so I did get that. I got
Zero
that.
progress.
riding the SkyTrain, I learned to read the SkyTrain sign. So that's how I started teaching myself the alphabet, which I recognize as being really important. And I use like phonetics, like Law Ling looks like a barrel of monkeys, monkey, and Gok Gai looks like a chicken with a little beak and stuff like that. I had difficulty learning like Greg did from my girlfriend or girlfriends at the time. So I did like Ed, and I made flashcards and I wrote everything in Thai. And I was learning to create my own sentences and put words together. And I used to spend a lot of time in Luang Prabang, and the Lao people used to help me with my Thai, and they think it's funny because Lao and Thai are a little bit different, but similar enough that they could help me fix my Thai spelling or have a good idea of what it should say. And, so I became somewhat proficient in the language except for speaking. Because if you just practice reading and writing, you don't get the tones down. And, over the years, you pick up the words and stuff. So it is interesting now I'm here in Cambodia and I can't speak Khmer like at all. There's a lot of words that are similar, like jamuk and wenta and moak, like French and English have similar words. Khmer and Thai have some similar words. So I try to speak Thai sometimes, and it doesn't help at all here.
All right, I got an issue. How about just weird or awkward social interactions, and maybe how it's changed over time? Because hopefully we've learned something, from when we first got here. Scott, why don't you start us off?
Mine that came to mind seemed to involve women, but little silly things like my first Thai girlfriend. I remember thinking I was being very nice one day, getting her flowers, but I ended up buying these flowers that are only used to make offerings at temples. And I gave it to her, and I remember she just looked absolutely perplexed and was nice enough not to tell me, I think for a couple of days. So I gave her those flowers, which was kind of neat. And then I remember another time I met a girl for a date, and I believe you guys have talked about this on your show, and she brought a friend. And you're just sort of like, oh, well, hang on, who's this? Who's this person? And that's really awkward. And then another one, which I guess could happen anywhere in the world, really, but really being sure you kind of know what's happening, is I had a meeting with quite a famous Thai guy named Kun Michai from the PDA here in Thailand, famous for foreigners for their cabbages and condoms restaurants, but they do all kinds of social programs. And I thought he and I were having a casual coffee, and I rolled up to Cabbages and Condoms where their office is, and there was a placard, like a name board, "Welcome, Mr. Scott from Smiling Albino." And I saw it and I thought, uh-oh, what's happened? And I got escorted to a meeting room where the board of PDA, which is a big organization, was all there.
Wow.
And
oh my God.
I was in a meeting with all of them about how we could potentially combine forces. Yeah, expect the unexpected.
Wow. I'll tell you, the asking a Thai woman out on a date and then having her bring a friend is such a classic, but apparently it's deserved. It's a deserved classic because it's happened to so many people. That exact thing happened to me. It's even happened to me where I've been hired to do some tutoring, and we're going to meet in Starbucks, a public place, and then they have someone else like shadowing, like their brother or like a friend, even in a public place like Starbucks. Trevor, what do you got?
Yeah, I've always been, Greg, the way you were saying that you were shy about maybe the food or sometimes using language, I was always careful or cautious about not making these types of faux pas. And we had an episode with you guys about faux pas, or maybe Ed was on the faux pas episode. I remember just cringing, like when people call their waitress P. P is like a respectful term for someone who's like higher in status in Thai culture, kind of, for someone who's like respected or you should give respect to. And like, it always seemed really awkward to me when people speaking Thai early on would refer to just anyone with that term. Or the why, you're supposed to why people first whom are higher in status or stature to you or whom you wish to give respect to. And then I remember just sort of like whying whoever, right? Like I whyed the person at the immigration desk at the airport until my girlfriend, Nat, at the time, she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, well, I mean, I kind of understood at that point that it wasn't really appropriate for me to, but at the same time, like they're stamping my passport. So I'm like, all right.
Getting the whys right is not easy. I'm still working on that. Greg, what do you got?
Well, a couple come to mind right away. In my first years here, I was a teacher, and I was doing a summer camp for these kids up in Kanchanaburi. And of course, we stopped at the Erawan Waterfall. And at the time, I wasn't quite so rotund as I am now. And I'm a big, tall guy, big, thick guy. And I was walking around in the waterfall by myself. And these three girls, probably about my age at the time, sort of late 20s, wanted to take a picture with me. And they were saying like, "Oh, you're tall and big." And they were laughing and giggling. And just for fun, I was like, "Hey, this is great." I'm like, this is fantastic. Ties are so friendly. And I picked one of the girls up, like in my arms, like crossing the threshold on a wedding night or something, and she was just laughing and giggling, and her friends were laughing and giggling, and someone took a picture, and it was all fun. And then I went down to the other teachers and the Thai teachers who were escorting us. And one of the older male teachers pulled me aside and he's like, "Yeah, you better not do that again. Like if her boyfriend was here, there would have been a big problem," and I had no idea, but that's seriously crossing the boundary for what's appropriate to do in public with a stranger,
These things are so tricky. When I think about awkward social interactions, I just feel like there's so many. Even it still happens, but I feel like my first year, there were just countless screw ups. And the good thing, and Greg and I have talked about this on the podcast, the good thing about Thai people is that they're so easygoing, and they kind of look at foreigners as if we're socially retarded anyway. So it's like when they usually laugh, like they rarely get offended. You know what I mean? It's usually something small where someone, kind of is bothered by something you don't even realize. I remember, another girl I was dating before I met my wife. We were sitting on the couch and watching TV, and we were kind of starting to cuddle. And for some reason, I think I wanted to I tried to swing my leg over her. It was one of those things where my foot came too close to her face, her head, and she totally freaked out and jumped up. She jumped up off the couch "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, I'm rearranging. I'm lifting my leg. It's somebody. It's funny because on the surface, I think there are. I mean, I consider you guys, as in Scott and Trevor, being travel experts. You would be much more competent to talk about this. But it's funny how there's certain things that are part of just human culture, and you would expect all human beings to react in a certain way. There's certain things that are just going to be offensive to everybody. And so there's this well of behavior that it's just you're human, so you're going to act a certain way. But then there's a lot of fine tuning, man. Just each culture just has these fine things. No American girl would have been bothered by me swinging my leg over her head. You know what I mean? It just never would have happened.
But then you haven't put your feet up on a seat or pointed. I mean, I don't know. The feet thing is kind of weird because I'm pretty adept at picking my keys up with my toes or things like that. I can juggle a soccer ball pretty well and whatnot. And I remember once I dropped a coin at a 7-Eleven and it bounced on the countertop, and then it was going to fall on the floor, and I did a little hacky sack kick, and I flipped it back up in the air with my foot and I caught it. Yeah. And I was like, bam. And everybody was like, "I can't believe you just kicked the coin," because the king's picture's on it. And it was they were shocked. Yeah, it was.
I don't know. It is a pretty bizarre move.
But those are and we were someone was saying earlier about how the Thais just sort of assume we're socially awkward, and they sort of laugh and they have one of their smiles for these situations. But then the next topic we were going to bring up is about losing face, because there is a line at which once you cross a certain line, it's not a socially awkward situation now. It's it's an actual problem. And only some of the things we've discussed here so far are actually the losing face issue, which is another deal, I think, altogether. Yeah.
Well, I'm not okay. I can, maybe I'll start this off. I don't know if it's losing face, but I've been in situations where I've accidentally crossed a line that, I didn't mean to cross. I mentioned before one time when I was going to Utia to take pictures. This was another trip to Utia to take pictures with, my yoga teacher, and he wanted to take pictures, in front of all the temples up in Ayutthaya. And, I got a bunch of cool pictures. I still have them on my hard drive. It was a good photography day. But so he was doing yoga poses in front of these Buddha statues, and it's some really cool photography. But at one point, these guards charged us. I thought they were going to attack us. And basically he he was doing headstands. He was doing inversions with his feet up straight up in the air that were like higher than the Buddha's head or something like that. So when they saw him like doing inversions with his feet up, they came like charging at us. And I'm like, what? Wait, like what's going on? And they were like, in their broken English and our broken Thai, they're like, you cannot lift your feet up like that. So they were fine with him like sitting in poses and stretching like in front of the Buddha, but they were really offended. Like they freaked out when he like put his feet in the air.
Losing face is a real tricky one. And even after, 21 years here, I mean, you basically just never want to lose your cool. You never want to become visibly angry. You don't want to raise your voice, and people get very uncomfortable as soon as you do that. But I can think of a losing face that happened just a couple of years ago, and I'd booked a meeting room. We went to the meeting room, me and the other people, and there was a group still in there, and they just kind of looked at us and very gently, very, very gently to the head of that team said, "Hey, like, how much longer are you going to be in there?" And we were certainly very cool about it. And he sort of looked at us and was awkward. And he said, "Oh, maybe 30 minutes. And it turned out that his team, seeing him talk to us a couple of meters away, caused him to lose great face. And he basically hated us for the rest of the time I worked there. And I had to pull him aside and apologize and say,
Really?
Would it actually have been better to have asked you to come to my office and walk across the office and go in my office?" And he said, yes. So that very soft, casual conversation in an awkward moment caused him to lose face. You just never know. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, I'd written down that there's the old expat saying about if you're not a patient person, Thailand will teach you patience. And if you're a patient person, Thailand will test it. Yeah. I lose my cool on people who are intentionally stupid or lazy, and when you do that, or when I do that, it's almost always a losing argument. Here in Cambodia, I think I've actually become more patient than I was in Thailand. But usually, I think whenever you get visibly upset, you're the one who loses face immediately, even if the other person is at fault. But what I've learned to do kind of is just, I know that it's not necessarily that person's fault. Sometimes you're upset at the situation when you get upset, right? Because the rules are different in Thailand and they don't make sense to us and they're so like ridiculous. So I've learned to like joke with the people about the situation and kind of win them over in the end that the situation is so stupid. But that seems to be easier here. Thai people just don't seem interested in hearing what I have to say.
What I'm really curious about, we've all been here a long, long time. It's like, how long until you felt like, I don't want to say Thai, but how long until you felt like, yeah, okay, I know what's going on. I feel comfortable. Like I'm here. Like I'm not a traveler. I'm not a newbie. I am solid and comfortable in Thailand. Greg?
I would say probably 5 years, but I also think that comes from the more people you meet, the more, as you go forward in time, the likelier you are that you will have been here longer than most of them. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of be honest. I like that. I like it when someone says, "How long you been here?" And I go 20 years, and they're like, "Whoa," or 5 years or 3 years. And they go, "Whoa," cause it's not easy to move here and set up a new life. And I think it's cool when someone recognizes that you've been successful for that many years, however many years it is. Mm-hmm. But I'd say it took me about 5 years to really know that I kind of deserved that. Whoa. Like, yeah, I've been here that long. 5 years is enough to earn me a whoa.
Okay. Trevor, how long till you kind of felt solid and established and so forth?
I would say it's the same for everyone, and it's the date that you went home to America or Canada and couldn't believe that they don't use bum guns. And you're like, savages. Like, who are these people?
You're like,
the day that you're like,
you're reaching for the bum gun. You're reaching for the bum gun.
Yeah. Then you're like, shit. Then you're officially like, Thai or Asian. Same with like eating with a fork and spoon, like it's just become so natural. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like after a while living in a certain place, I remember many years ago, a friend of mine he married an Australian woman and he lived in Australia and he started speaking with an Australian accent just because it was all he heard all the time. And it was just the way he learned to communicate. Right. So we speak English in like a Thai tonal English lots of times when we speak to Thai people, because that's the most effective way to communicate that. And then you end up going home and you still talk in like this sing-songy kind of way that I think people find is funny. And it just increases over the years. So, I don't think I consider myself Thai by any means, but like a lot of my behaviors, I think, had become Thai. So like when I'm in Cambodia, even just a couple of years ago, I would always think it's funny how the Thai people, or funny how the Cambodian people do things compared to how we do things, meaning those of us who live in Thailand, like, I just felt like I felt Thai a lot. I missed Thai food when I was away from Thailand, and that felt like a really Thai thing to do.
I felt like I'd really become Thai when I started going, "Oi," when I was surprised or something.
Yeah, the sound effects for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely don't feel Thai, but the way I think about it is that the moment I gave up on the idea that I might leave next year, because like when you're here 2 years, you're like, yeah, I think next year I'll probably head home, and then like year 4, I'm like, well, this will probably be my last year. But I'm a little bit embarrassed. It took me a long time to give up that illusion. Honestly, I think it was around year 12 or 13 where I just finally realized, I was just like, oh my God, like I'm not going back next year. Like, I don't know when I'm going back. I might never go back. Like for me, it was more than 10 years, which is ridiculous because every single person that knew me or back home or even here would have been like, dude, you're a lifer. Like what, probably after about 3 years, probably anyone who knew me was like, dude, I don't see you going back to the States. And I was like, no. This is my last year in Thailand. I'm pretty sure this is going to be my last year. So I turned a corner around year 12 or 13.
You've all said stuff that really resonates with me, like bum gun. Absolutely. Now, how do people live without that? Fork and spoon. I've asked for a spoon so many times when I've gone back to Canada. And then Greg, you saying, getting the woo after being here a while, even though I moved here to start a travel company and start a life in a business. I remember I met a guy in my first month that had been here 7 years. And that just seemed like a mind bender. Even though I had moved here, I just thought, wow, 7 years, like incredible. But I'd say it was around 5 year mark. Like a lot of you have said, that I started to feel really at home and this where life was. And I think back to a moment, this isn't necessarily where it happened, but I was taking a motorcycle taxi from my house on Ramkhamhaeng Road down to Sukhumvit Soi 2, which would be good 10 kilometers or so. It's a bit of a haul on a motorcycle taxi early one morning. And I was reading a paperback book on the back of the motorbike, whizzing down the road. and I just at some point realized what I was doing. And I thought, wow, like, yeah, I'm kind of local. Like this is.
That's Thai.
Yeah.
That's very Thai for sure.
Well, as we're wrapping up here, guys, I want to end on a positive note here. I want to hear how Thailand has changed each of us for the better. Scott, I remember when you were hosting Pechakucha a few years back, I heard you say something that stuck with me. And you said, I think a lot of us here who have been here a long time want to change Thailand, but that's the wrong way to think of it. We should let Thailand change us. And I think it's true for anyone who stays here a long time. So, Trevor, why don't you start?
I think, what's interesting, Scott and I recently did an episode about just being an expat in different countries in Asia. And I've had the experience of, living here in Cambodia and spending time in Indonesia and Korea and Vietnam. And I think the biggest change to me wasn't simply just living in Thailand, although Bangkok being such a cosmopolitan city certainly played a large role in this. But I think it was just being exposed to lots of different people from so many different countries. Like we have friends from all over the world, and we're constantly being exposed to different ways of thinking that aren't just Thai, but are, Canadian or Estonian or Bulgarian. I have friends from so many different places. And I think that's really changed the way that I think. In many ways, I think I've become maybe less American than I've become like more Thai or more Khmer, So I think I have a more global perspective now. And at the same time, that makes me more open to trying not to judge or assume things about other people. Because while they're like influences of their own culture, they're also part of this very cosmopolitan society in which I seem to live, or that we all live.
Scott, what about you?
Yeah, I still haven't mastered this one, I guess, but I have definitely, part of this might be age too, but I'm a little calmer. I don't think I get instantly as angry as I used to about things, kind of let situations take care of themselves a little bit. I don't try and convince people to be a part of something that I might have before. And I can sense a bit when someone's lying to me not to disappoint me. And I'll just kind of smile. Like I always think of Derek Van Pelt, who was on the show, out-tie the ties, like just put on a smile and kind of nod. And like, I try and out-tie the ties when I know they're just trying to not disappoint me. But I'd say the thing I probably enjoy the most, and it's changed me the most for the better, is that I really enjoy mixing with everybody, from a bottle collector, from like the very, very poor person to like a very rich person, all in one day. Like you can literally have conversations and interactions with all ranges of the social spectrum in the same day. And it kind of always reminds me that we're all people and we're all fighting the same struggles. And I really like that mix of people in a single day. And I kind of try and really give everyone an equal footing and just view people as people.
Yeah, for sure.
Right on. Ed, what about you?
Well, first off, I feel like Trevor and Scott stole my ideas, because I think they're. When Trevor
We have
was
similar experiences, so it makes sense.
right. When Trevor was talking, I was thinking that's me. That's right. And when Scott was talking, I'm like, no, wait a minute. That's me. That's totally right. So I'm going to go in a slightly different direction then, because I have to now. But it dawned on me that for me, I've learned a lot from my job of being a teacher, and for the last 13 years, a professor at a Thai university. And that's just understanding where different students are coming from and trying to basically just trying to be a good professor and trying to be a good teacher. Like the reason I'm thinking about this is that right before we're recording this, I had a very painful conversation with a student who just very, very quickly, very briefly. This is a student who has some kind of social issues. I don't know if he's on the autism spectrum or whatever it is, but just kind of an awkward guy. Actually was very abstract thinking and like a thinker, but just not like locked in socially. And he got a lot of bad grades and failed a bunch of classes. And he sent me a message for advice about how not to fail. And I'm trying to give him some advice. And I was talking to our admin person, and then we realized that actually his GPA was just below the cutoff, and he's actually failed out of my university.
Oh no!
So literally right before this call, I have to tell him that he's out of the university.
Oh man!
And it's just, so I think I've learned a lot, So I just told him, I was like, look, I know you are a smart person. I know you are from the questions you asked. I know that if you figure out how to stay organized, I know if you figure out how to make deadlines, I know you can get a college degree if you want one. And I think that I would not have been able to do that 10 years ago, maybe not even 5 years ago, So I don't know. So I've improved, I think in a way, it's like what you guys said, but in this case, it's just relating to students and seeing where they're coming from and trying to communicate to them in a way that is best for them.
Nice. Well, I guess I'll go last then. For me, I agree with everything you guys have said. I think it applies to most all of us here. But for me, I think the one thing that I gained is perspective, especially on how absolutely ridiculously spoiled we are in the West. And this sometimes comes off as me sounding anti-Western, but I'm not. But I just we don't even know how good we have it in terms of, I'm talking from a Canadian perspective here. Like, we have the best of everything, the best or among the best in the world, infrastructure, healthcare, social safety nets, roads, bridges, education, what have you. And, I see photos online of on Reddit or something, some guy's like, hey, I'm playing with my dog in the backyard. And you see this guy living in this massive house with this massive backyard and front yard. And you forget, Jesus, I forget, you don't even know how huge your property is. And then you think of us living here in Asia and all of us are lucky enough to have quite nice places, but we don't have a giant front and backyard where we can run around with our dogs. And just the struggles that people have every day. There's a lot of people that have nothing but bad luck, and for whom our worst day would be their dream come true, And you don't get exposed to that in your average, boring Western existence. And so I think it just, for me, after living here for so long, it just sort of, it opened my eyes and it opened my mind a bit to what other people in the world go through and the experiences they have. And it just lets me put my own existence growing up into perspective.
I was going to say that, memes, a lot of memes are kind of parodies or exaggerations, and, they're funny and interesting. But I'm telling you, man, the first world problems meme is deadly accurate. It's like deadly realistic. It's totally true. Like the stuff that bothers you or drives you crazy, when you put it in perspective, it's pretty silly.
Yeah. I was going to mention that too, like white privilege, and just that you're so much more aware of it, or I'm so much more aware of it. And even here in Cambodia, which is like has less developed or has more poverty perhaps than Thailand, you really do value everything that you're fortunate enough to have, or the opportunities that are presented to us. I definitely think I feel that. And it makes me more empathetic. And like Scott was saying, talking to the janitor or whomever, I think it's interesting that because of the recognition of the privilege I have, I'm more sympathetic and I'm more open to helping other people, especially those that are less fortunate, or certainly at least being nice to them and polite to them and not judging them for their station in life.
What a conversation, guys. I think we all agreed.
I thought it was going to be about
took a little break.
Crazy taxi stories and such.
We're going to sing Kumbaya now?
We've got to do a follow-up to this within under a year, because we still have more in our notes here, and I think there's a lot of great things we could talk about. So thanks everyone for getting together, and we hope everyone's enjoyed this.
I say we do this once a year.
Yeah, hopefully I could be back in Bangkok for it. I need my Thai food fix, man.
We can do it in person with Thai food and a lot of beer.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds
I accept
good.
that. Until then.
Yeah,
right, thanks guys.
Everyone.
Thank you, guys. Dude, you said it right. That was so much fun to record, because we're just old friends, and even though like these days we don't spend that much time with those guys, even you and I, we don't hang out that much together because we record the podcast. You got your family, but it's just when you have memories from 20 years ago, 19 years ago, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, it's like we've got a database of stories. So we only scratched the surface, and of course. Basically they were asking the questions, so you and I were kind of responding to them. But it was really fun to reminisce with old friends.
Yeah, and it's also really important to know, too, like when you move to Bangkok roughly the same time as someone, and you stay friends with them, and you stay in Bangkok for a long time. I assume that this applies to any city in the world, but let's talk about Bangkok. But for all intents and purposes, we grew up together.
That's right. In Thailand. All right. We grew up in Thailand together. That's right.
Yeah. But like when you move to Thailand, you're starting a new life.
You are like a newbie for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like to think that all four of us kind of grew up together, which is great. And it also underscores the fact that, when you stay in Thailand for a long time, like getting your balance here and establishing a base, it's not easy, but it really, really becomes easier when you have a solid group of friends to bounce ideas off of and to talk to, and who can understand what you're going through, like these guys are.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So always fun to talk to those guys, whether it's online or in person. Better in person over a beer. But I also had a thought, Ed. I thought it was funny. I thought the four of us would make sort of like a good little. You remember the old video game Gauntlet, where there's like four.
I do remember the game Gauntlet. Yeah.
There's a warrior, there's a Valkyrie, there's an elf, and a dwarf. So the four of us. I said that Scott was the businessman, Trevor was the adventurer, you're the scholar, and I'm the storyteller. So.
I'll take it. If you want to call me a scholar, you're that works for me.
Yeah, we got to go and throw a ring into a volcano or something like that. But many thanks to Scott and Trevor for coming on. It was great to talk to you online, and hopefully we'll be back to having beers in pubs very soon.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, let's get into some love, loathe, or live with, where one of us picks a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as something that we just have to learn to live with no matter how we feel about it. Last time, Ed asked me what I thought of Thai power strips. Boo. So this week, it is my turn.
All right.
So, Ed, what do you think of, and I'm going to say the Thai word, and I'm probably going to get the pronunciation wrong, but Patong Ko.
No idea what that is.
Patong Ko are those little deep fried donuts that are usually in the
Oh.
shape of an X. And they are
okay.
served with a little dish of sweetened condensed milk. What
That's
do you
right.
think about those?
Yeah, not into it. So this fits into the category of so this is kind of like a dessert or sweet or like a pastry, right?
Well, a lot of Thais eat them for breakfast.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Yeah, I'm gonna go thumbs down. The whole deep frying thing is I'm not into it. Now, when I was young, in the States, we do have fried dough, which is basically the same thing. So it's kind of like amusement park food or fairground food, along with,
Right.
But as I've gotten older and I eat a little bit healthier, it's like that kind of just deep fried stuff. It's not into it. And then the condensed milk, never understood it. It's like part of the whole sweetness, like weird sweetness milk, like coconut milk thing that I'm not into. So yeah, I know what you're talking about. I got to go thumbs down. It's weird because, as we've said before, I'm very much into a lot of main course Thai food. I love it, whether it's tom yum, tom kha, pad Thai, or all the curries. Like, there's not a Thai curry that I don't love.
Right.
So I really feel that I love Thai food. But the weird thing is, it's none of the sides. It's none of the smaller stuff. It's none of the desserts. It's none of the like accessories. I'm just not into it.
Yeah, these things I'm going to have to go live with on these things because I'm really conflicted on them, actually. I'm probably making them out to be much more complicated than they are. But like on their own, these little like greasy clumps of fried dough are just, it's like eating paper. Like they taste all right, but they're not delicious. But what they are is basically a delivery mechanism to shovel this condensed milk into your face, which I love. I love condensed milk.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's just like cigarettes are the mechanism. Like cigarettes are stupid by themselves. It's just the mechanism to get nicotine into your body, right? So these things are just, they're kind of pointless, but they're just sort of a really, really handy way to shovel sweetened condensed milk into your system, which is
it's
not
kind of
great.
odd. It's kind of odd how much I love like Thai main courses, but I just, all the other stuff I'm not into, just the way it is. So I'm gonna have to go loathe on this one.
All right, I'll go live with, because sometimes they're good, but only if there's a little bit of condensed milk. Otherwise, I'm like, why am I eating this? It's just it's pointless. The very definition of hollow calories.
All right, a final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Yeah, we do. You can also listen to each episode on the YouTubes. You can send us a voicemail online that we'll feature on the show, or even reach out to me directly on Twitter, where I am BKK Greg. Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you back here next week.
No doubt.
How many provinces does Bangkok have?
Wait, you mean Thailand? How many provinces does Thailand have?
Let me ask you that again. Stupid.
How bad could you screw that up?
Pretty bad. It must
Wait,
be this giant glass
wait.
of Sambuca I just drank.